Welcome to the Refuge of St. Joseph channel. Today our prayer will be a blessing for the family. Like the video, subscribe and share it so this prayer reaches the people you love. Morning light, soft and ordinary, finds your home the way light always finds what it loves. Through the smallest opening, across a sink that still remembers last night's dishes, over a table where a conversation ended too soon, along the framed faces on the wall that carry stories you hold with pride and sometimes with ache. Perhaps the house is quiet and you can hear the refrigerator hum. Or perhaps it isn't, and small footsteps already ask for cereal and attention. Yet, beneath the surface noise, there is a deeper hum inside you, a restlessness that has been trying to tell you something for days. You've been brave for so long that bravery has started to feel like numbness, and the schedules and bills and messages and worries have lined up like soldiers at the door of your heart. Right now, take one slow breath as if you were opening a window that has been stuck for years. Let the air enter with permission, and let your shoulders drop one small, honest inch. With this breath, your body begins to believe what your soul has always known. You are not alone, and your home is not forgotten. Maybe you woke with a prayer half-formed on your lips and a question you are almost ashamed to ask. Will our family be blessed? And will it be enough for us to keep going with peace? You don't say it out loud because hope can be tender, and you have learned to protect tenderness like a candle in the wind. Yet the desire is there, stubborn and beautiful, the kind of desire that God notices long before you manage to speak it. You carry love that tires you and love that saves you, love that refuses to quit even on the days you want to pull the covers back over your heart. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust Divine Providence, not as a slogan placed on a wall, but as a daily surrender that reorders the room from the inside out. Trust is not a switch. Trust is a posture, and it begins in small places. At the kitchen sink, in the hallway between bedrooms, at the threshold where you decide to enter with gentleness rather than with noise. Imagine a quiet figure standing near that threshold, not imposing, not demanding, simply present like good wood beneath the hand, patient and steady. St. Joseph does not interrupt. He accompanies. He knows the language of houses, hinges that squeak, floors that carry the weight of the family's steps, tables that hold bread and tension in the same hour. And in that knowing, there is no judgment, only a careful attention that every heart longs to receive. Joseph's silence is not the silence of avoidance. It is the silence of deep listening, the kind that hears God beneath the commotion and protects what is vulnerable until it can breathe again. When he is near, the temperature of the soul shifts by a degree or two, and the nervous system, which has been braced for impact, starts to release the habit of alarm because a guardian has entered the room. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Let the breath come again, this time slower on the exhale, because a longer exhale tells your body, gently and scientifically, that danger is not in command right now, that it is safe to lower the shoulders and soften the jaw and let the heart step out from behind its shield. This is not a trick. It is an act of reverent stewardship over the temple that is your body, where the Lord chooses to dwell even in the clutter of an ordinary Tuesday. Place your hand over your chest and notice the movement beneath your palm, the small rise and fall that refuses to give up. And say within, very simply, I receive. You are not receiving a fantasy. You are receiving presence. Grace often arrives like this, unannounced, unspectacular, and yet unmistakable when it finds you. Let it find you now, here, in the place where you most feared you were invisible. There are truths you already know, and yet you may need to hear them again, the way tired muscles need warm water more than they need explanation. Your family is not defined by yesterday's argument, by the tight budget, by the diagnosis, by the silence at dinner, by the apology you have not heard, or the apology you do not know how to give. These realities matter. They are part of the path, but they are not the whole path, and they are not the name God speaks over your home. The blessing you are seeking is not a magic trick that removes all crosses. It is a strength that makes the carrying holy, a light that helps you choose the next faithful step. Blessing does not erase effort. Blessing dignifies effort. Blessing does not silence emotion. Blessing teaches emotion to sing in tune with truth. Blessing does not bypass the brain. Blessing partners with it, inviting your thoughts into a gentler rhythm where fear is noticed but not obeyed. Right now, allow one memory to rise. The moment your home felt most like a refuge, even if it lasted only a minute. Hold that memory as if you were holding a fragile piece of wood in a workshop, knowing that the craftsman who works beside you is patient with knots and warps and imperfections. In Nazareth, nothing was wasted, not the leftover wood, not the crumbs after a meal, not the quiet hours when words were few and love was dense. In your home, nothing needs to be wasted either, not even the mistakes. Because in the hands of God and under the patronage of Joseph, everything can be planned, aligned, and made strong enough to carry tomorrow. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, and every prayer, no matter how inarticulate, becomes work that blesses. If you are weary because money has been tight or the future feels like a room with no windows, let honesty be your beginning instead of your enemy. Name the pressure you feel without shame, as one naming a weight before lifting it with a friend's help. Anxiety does not make you faithless, it makes you human. What you do with that anxiety, whether you clutch it or you place it down for a moment of blessing, will shape the atmosphere of your home. As you inhale, imagine collecting the scattered pieces of worry that keep your mind sprinting. As you exhale, picture setting them on the workbench where Joseph waits with patient hands. He will not force a solution. He will offer a steadier way to hold the problem. And you will feel the first shift from panic to prayerfulness, from reactivity to response, from clenched to open. There is a courage you have been delaying, the courage of gentleness. Gentleness is not weakness. Gentleness is strength under direction, the way a carpenter's square guides the cut so that the line remains true. Without guidance, pressure splits the wood. With guidance, pressure shapes it. In your conversations, in your corrections, in your decisions, let gentleness be the square against which your words are measured, so that the truth you speak does not become a weapon, but a blessing. The mind will tell you that harshness is efficient, that speed is victory, that volume equals impact. The heart, when aligned with God, will teach you that tenderness is precise, that patience builds structures that last, that quiet authority often carries further than force. This is not a theory, this is a practice, and practice becomes character when repeated with love. Perhaps you feel alone in trying to change the atmosphere of your home, and the loneliness has been heavier than the effort itself. Hear this, and allow it to sink below the level of mere encouragement into the marrow of your hope. You are not working alone. The Holy Family is not a distant painting, but a living companionship that moves toward you when you ask. And right now, you are asking. Even if others under your roof are not ready to pray with you, you can begin. And beginnings carry power out of proportion to their size. Light a single candle, and you change the room. Speak a single blessing, and you change the room. Offer a single act of surrender, and you change the room. Change the room, and the room begins to change the hearts inside it, including your own. Let the refrain become familiar on your tongue, not as an escape, but as a recentering, the way a compass needle finds north after being shaken. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Say it slowly, and let each word land where it needs to land, on the child you worry about, on the spouse you love and struggle to understand, on the bill that sits unopened, on the diagnosis that haunts the calendar, on the chair that remains empty because grief has its own presence. Intercede for us, not to remove our story, but to thread it with grace so that what has been torn may be mended, and what has been hardened may be softened, and what has been noisy may learn a quieter strength. As we continue, allow your home to become a chapel without changing the furniture, and let your breath become a prayer without changing its rhythm too much, and let your attention become an altar where God is welcome. Place a hand over your heart once more, and notice how it answers your touch with movement, a small yes to life that happens even when you forget to ask for it. This is the first blessing, the gift of being held by God in the ordinary. The second blessing follows, the permission to begin again right here without drama, with dignity. The third blessing waits just ahead, the learning of a simple surrender that will not erase responsibility, but will finally relieve you of carrying what is not yours to carry alone. Stay with this quiet, and let it stay with you. What is beginning in you now is not fragile, it is humble, and humility holds better than pride when storms come. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence, to measure our words with love, to empty our hands of control so they can receive what God has wanted to place there for so long. Your family is not beyond blessing, and your home is not beyond repair. The master builder is already here, and we are apprentices of Nazareth, learning the patient art of making space for grace. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There are mornings when the mind wakes before the body and begins counting, as if salvation could be tallied on a spreadsheet. Days left until rent, dollars between paycheck and groceries, appointments scattered across the calendar like anxious birds. The heart keeps pace with this arithmetic, beating a little faster than it needs to, and the nervous system lowers its shoulder as if bracing for a collision with the day. In that inner weather, distrust grows quiet roots, not because you lack faith, but because you have been carrying more than a human can carry without trembling. Even holy people tremble. Even faithful homes feel thin some weeks, as though the walls themselves were listening for news of a future that refuses to introduce itself. It is here, at this small interior threshold where worry meets responsibility, that the wound begins to whisper its logic. Hold tighter, think harder, sleep less, speak sharper, yet the whisper does not heal, it only holds, and what it holds it slowly hardens. When Jesus says, "Do not worry about your life," he's not shaming the poor or scolding the attentive. He is placing a hand on the pulse of our fear and teaching it how to beat in a truer rhythm. Matthew 6:25-34 is not naive poetry. It is intelligent mercy for bodies that know adrenaline too well. The God who counts lilies is also the God who counts bills. And still he says that the Father knows what we need. Meanwhile, in Matthew 1:20, a sleeping Joseph receives a message that interrupts disaster with direction, because providence often reaches us when our defenses are quiet enough to listen. This is not magical thinking, it is theological realism. The Father acts, and when we entrust, we become available to the action. The amygdala loosens its grip, the breath lengthens, the vagus nerve signals safety, and the soul, finally believing the room is not on fire, can receive instruction without panic. Distrust, if left unattended, begins to shape the tone of a home. Conversations become negotiations, planning becomes hoarding, and affection grows cautious, as if love must wait until the numbers agree to it. The children, even when they are old, feel the weather of the adults, and the house learns to tiptoe. Paradoxically, the more we try to guarantee the future, the more fragile the present becomes, because control is a poor carpenter. It takes measurements only from fear, and wood cut by fear seldom fits. St. Joseph, however, measures by another standard. His silence is not the silence of indifference, it is the stillness of a craftsman's eye, the pause that keeps the hand from rushing the cut. He trusts because he listens, and he listens because he believes the Father speaks even through sleep, even through uncertainty, even through the grain of a difficult day. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. Repeat that not as a slogan, but as a way of standing. Trust becomes a posture in small muscles first. The jaw unclenches, the shoulders lower by degrees, the chest stops guarding every breath as if oxygen were rationed. These are not theatrics. They are sacraments of the ordinary, signs in the body that the soul is remembering who holds it. When the body returns to safety, the mind returns to proportion, and decisions that once felt like cliffs become steps. Providence does not float above reality. Providence enters it, like light that does not erase the room, but allows you to see where the furniture actually is, so you stop stubbing your toes on the same edge. Examination question: where am I trying to control what belongs to God? Let the answer come without defense. Perhaps it is in the way you rehearse worst-case scenarios so often that your imagination forgets how to host good news. Perhaps it is in the habit of punishing yourself for not being omniscient, as if vigilance were the same as virtue. Perhaps it is in the refusal to ask for help because you mistake solitude for strength. Control hides under noble names: prudence, stewardship, leadership. Yet it trembles when asked to release even a corner of the map. St. Joseph teaches a nobler nobility: hands ready to work, heart ready to yield, eyes ready to watch for God's next quiet instruction. He does not abdicate, he abides. A home smudged by fear does not need louder faith, it needs steadier presence. Think of a lamp on a low table. It does not shout, it does not lecture, it simply keeps being light long enough for the eyes to adjust. In a similar way, simple practice, Joseph's act of surrender, 1 minute morning and night. St. Joseph, provide for us. This is not a shortcut, but a reshaping, not a spell, but a statement of reality that your body can learn by repetition. The repetition matters because the nervous system believes what it experiences more than what it merely hears. A gentle phrase, morning and night, lays new pathways in the mind, the way a craftsman lays grain upon grain until a beam can hold weight without complaining. Anxiety, left unnamed, colonizes the imagination and turns every hallway into a threat. Anxiety, named before God, becomes a prayer that chooses companionship over control. Naming is not weakness, it is the beginning of governance. When you say, I am afraid of this bill, of this diagnosis, of this silence, you are not enthroning fear. You are bringing it into the workshop where it can be measured by hope. Joseph's workshop does not deny knots in the wood. It learns how to work with them so the finished table will not crack along the grain. Your home, too, can be built with honest materials, and honesty includes the weight you do not know how to carry. Providence is not insulted by truth. Providence is invited by it. Let us be honest about the economics of the soul. When distrust is chief accountant, it charges interest on every emotion. Joy feels expensive, laughter feels reckless, rest feels like theft. Under Providence, the ledger changes. Joy becomes investment. Laughter returns liquidity to relationships. Rest repairs the tools that build tomorrow. This is not metaphor only. It is measurable in tone, in sleep that finally arrives, in conversations that end with blessing rather than with a slammed door of silence. The household learns a different arithmetic. Gratitude tallies small mercies. Prudence plans without panic. Generosity spends where love asks and saves where wisdom suggests. The house does not become naive, it becomes grounded. Scripture does not promise a life without weight. It promises a yoke that fits. Scripture, Matthew 6:25-34, Matthew 1:20. These references are coordinates for a weary traveler. One points to the field where worry is gently contradicted, the other to the bedroom where a man receives courage in a dream. Both remind us that the Father speaks to the day and to the night, to the mind awake and to the heart at rest. If you have been trying to hear God over the noise, consider that he might be speaking beneath it, in the place that opens when you finally stop arguing with the future. The blessing you are seeking is not a cancellation of responsibility. It is the presence that makes responsibility human again. Key phrase. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. School implies practice. Practice implies patience. Patience implies time. Give your home time to change its accent. Let words of trust become the dialect of your rooms. Let decisions, even the small ones, like how you greet a tired spouse at the door, carry the hint of a new government where peace sits at the head of the table. Distrust will attempt a coup from time to time. Do not be surprised. But when it does, remember the square in the craftsman's hand. The line returns to true not by shouting at the wood, but by aligning it. Slowly, firmly, again and again, until straightness is no longer an effort, but a habit. Examination question: where am I trying to control what belongs to God? If an answer has emerged, hold it with compassion, firm yet compassionate. That is the way of real conversion. You are not scolded, you are invited. You are not shamed, you are shepherded. You are not dismissed, you are dignified. The wound that hid in the name of prudence is now in the light, and light, in scripture and in workshops, is always the beginning of precision. There is a future you cannot design, and there is a Father who can. Between those truths stands a guardian who knows how to listen and how to lead. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Some evenings arrive with a softness that nearly goes unnoticed. The lamp is low, dishes rest in the rack like small boats after a day at sea, and the hallway holds a warm hush that comes only when everyone is finally home. In that hush, there is a space the world cannot buy and cannot counterfeit, a space where a simple gesture carries more weight than a day's worth of advice. A hand lifted slowly, a thumb making a small cross on a forehead, words spoken in a voice that knows the shape of each name in the house. This is not ceremony for ceremony's sake. This is the language of blessing, as ancient as the desert and as present as tonight. Numbers 6:24-26 does not sound like a command in this room. It sounds like water finding the riverbed that has always been there. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. The Lord give you peace. Faces begin to remember what peace feels like when a loved voice speaks it gently into the air. There is something profoundly human and quietly neurological about this moment. Gentle words, close proximity, the low light of a candle, the steady cadence of a familiar psalm. These elements cooperate with the body's design to downshift the nervous system out of vigilance and towards safety. A blessing delivered with tenderness can steady breath, soften shoulders, and release the kind of warmth that calms an overworked amygdala. The skin learns trust through touch. The heart believes truth through tone. The cool trace of holy water on the brow becomes a sacramental whisper, marking the body with a memory of belonging, so that even on difficult days the forehead carries the map back home. In the domestic church, authority tastes like care. It does not crush. It carries. A mother's hands, a father's hands, sometimes tired and nicked by the day's work, become a chalice for grace when they hover over a child who is restless, or over a teenager who isn't ready to talk, or over a spouse whose quiet has been misunderstood. The blessing does not force conversation. It creates the safety in which conversation may one day bloom. The blessing does not pretend to fix history. It reverently acknowledges that history can be held by someone stronger than the family's collective will. Within this reverence, Joseph's presence is more than a statue on a shelf. It is a way of standing in a doorway, protective without suffocating, ready without intruding, strong without noise. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There are houses where affection is fluent and blessing feels natural, and there are houses where tenderness has had to relearn its vocabulary. In such places, a first blessing may feel awkward, like a song sung softly by someone who is unsure of the key. Yet even a soft song can be true. Children of any age recognize sincerity long before they analyze form. The heart translates love even when grammar is imperfect. A father tracing the sign of the cross over a sleepy head. A mother whispering the Aaronic blessing over a child who keeps starting awake. The family noticing how the room changes when the name of the Lord is spoken. These moments become the architecture of belonging. Under this roof, mercy has a home address. Some nights, the one in need of blessing is the parent whose patience frayed at 4 in the afternoon. The parent who sat in a parked car for 2 extra minutes to gather themselves before coming inside. The parent who carries a quiet grief no one else sees. The domestic church was made for such honesty. A spouse's hand resting lightly on another's shoulder. a cross traced where worry gathers near the temples, words spoken slowly enough to be felt. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. There is a repair that begins here, not dramatic, not cinematic, yet durable. The body hears the cadence of care and begins to trust the night again. The home church is not fragile, it is intimate. Intimacy lets small things carry great meaning. The click of a match, the veil of a candle flame, the crisp sound of a Bible page turned, the almost silent breath between the words of a psalm. These are tiny sacraments of atmosphere. They tell the nervous system that it is time to belong. They tell memory that this room is where the name of the Lord is loved. They tell the imagination that the future is not a threat to be solved alone, but a mystery to be entrusted together. In this atmosphere, pride finds it easier to lay down its armor, and resentment discovers it cannot stand up under the weight of spoken blessing. There is a hidden inheritance in households that practice blessing. Moments that might have become arguments become altars instead. Nights that might have ended in distance end in a touch on the forehead. Days that might have been swallowed by fear are interrupted by words strong enough to steady the room. The child who once braced for correction begins to anticipate care, and correction, when it comes, has soil deep enough to take root as wisdom rather than as shame. The teenager who values independence more than anything else may not say it out loud, yet the quiet act of being blessed carves a gentle path through the thicket of self-protection. Even grief stands different in a blessed house. It is not smaller, but it is not solitary. Examination question: when was the last time you blessed your family? The heart might answer with a date, or with a memory, or with a longing. Longing is a holy answer. It means the soul knows what fits it. It means the home recognizes the sound of its own name. And longing is never mocked in heaven, it is welcomed. The domestic church thrives on small fidelity repeated more than on large gestures performed rarely. Repeated blessing thickens the air with trust, the way layers of varnish protect a table that will need to hold many meals, many elbows, many notebooks, many tears. The image of Joseph returns here, not as a distant figure, but as a mentor of quiet strength. In art, he often holds a lily, a sign of purity. In homes, he also seems to hold the threshold itself, a presence at the edges where comings and goings begin. A family that lives under his patronage learns a posture at those edges. Less fear, more attentiveness, less defensiveness, more dignity, less noise, more truthful words. Blessing sounds like that posture put into language, and the language becomes a rhythm the house learns to keep, like a heartbeat under the floorboards. There are times when circumstances make blessing feel weighty, finances tight, health uncertain, relationships strained. No one should be surprised if the voice trembles. Trembling does not disqualify truth. In fact, the tremble makes the room safer because it signals that love is not pretending. The voice that shakes while saying, "The Lord bless you and keep you," is a voice that has decided to stand on something firmer than control. The thumb that hesitates before tracing the cross is a thumb that understands the cross is not an ornament, but a promise of presence in every kind of Friday. Under such a sign, the house becomes braver by degrees. Key phrase: St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. This phrase, kneaded into the evening like salt into dough, preserves and deepens what has been spoken. Within those words is a theology of fatherhood and of tenderness, of protection without possession, of leadership without domination. They name the friend who knows how to stand beside a doorframe and make a dwelling feel watched over. They seek help without spectacle. They remind the home that heaven is not far, and if tonight no candle is near and no holy water is at hand, the mystery remains near. A hand can become a lamp when it rests with care. Breath can become the softest hymn when it slows beside a face loved since the beginning. A short psalm remembered imperfectly can still carry the whole house forward a step. In these simple movements, grace does what grace always does. It makes the ordinary sturdy enough to hold the holy. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. There are moments when a room changes temperature without the thermostat moving at all, when a single sentence lands heavy steady, and the air tightens as if the walls had leaned in to listen, and everyone's pulse begins to drum the rhythm of self-defense. In those moments, words often rush like a river in flood, carrying broken branches and yesterday's debris, and the mouth, hungry to be understood, forgets that understanding is a delicate creature that startles easily. The body knows the old choreography: raised tone, narrowed eyes, a jaw that locks 2 seconds before the heart realizes it has already begun to leave the conversation. And this choreography feels inevitable until another presence enters the threshold and offers an unlearned step. Joseph's silence does not slam the door on speech. It opens a side door to wisdom, the narrow door where a breath fits, where a glance has time to soften, where the soul remembers that victory without communion is defeat wearing a medal. Active silence has texture. It is not emptiness, but a woven cloth strong enough to hold what would otherwise tear a room in two. It has weight. The kind of weight that calms the nervous system because someone has decided not to escalate, and that decision steadies the mirror neuron dance that so quickly turns 2 hearts into 2 fires. There is something deeply humane and neurologically merciful about a pause that lets the prefrontal cortex rejoin the conversation, about a small delay that allows adrenaline to complete its wave without being crowned as truth. The Church calls this virtue prudence. The sciences call it regulation. The saints call it listening. Scripture calls it obedience and pondering. Joseph rises and does as the angel commands without a speech to justify himself, and Mary holds words in the secret room where meanings ripen. In both, God's voice is given room to finish his sentence. Arguments that run on reactivity tend to carve the same grooves across the floor of a house, grooves that every foot will trip on eventually. But where silence like Joseph's enters, a new path begins to appear, faint as a deer trail at first, then clearer with use. On that path, the goal shifts, not to win, but to remain together, not to dominate, but to discern, not to finish first, but to arrive faithful. The mouth rests long enough for the heart to remember why the face across the table matters, and the face, seeing that it is not under attack, loosens the armor it learned to sleep in. The story that had begun to collapse into accusation is given new chapters: context, sorrow, fear, hope, and the room, once hard, becomes porous to grace. Joseph's silence is not the absence of courage. It is courage's most disciplined expression, a strength that refuses to spend itself on noise when the heart of the matter is still trying to be born. In homes where words have been used like tools, but sometimes like weapons, silence becomes the craftsman's square that returns the line to true. A carpenter does not correct a crooked cut by arguing with the wood. The carpenter realigns, holds steady, checks the grain, lets the tool rest for a breath so that the hand can see again. The soul learns by similar patience. A breath before reply becomes a hinge on which the entire evening swings from fracture to future. A single minute, 60 counted seconds, has room enough for blood pressure to lower, for the eyes to find kindness, for a memory to surface that says, "This person is my home." And not a trick, not manipulation, but a reverent space in which truth can be spoken without tearing the fabric that must hold the truth tomorrow as well. Fast from the last word sounds like smallness until one sees what it saves. The last word is often the cheapest word, the word purchased with pride's currency and later returned with regret's receipt. Those who have experimented with releasing it describe a surprising freedom, as if a weight they had been calling strength finally admitted to being exhaustion. Without the final volley, the nervous system stands down. Without the final point scored, shame has no game to play. Without the final flare, tomorrow has no ashes to sweep. In that quiet, dignity has time to sit back down at the table, and affection, which had been hiding under the chair, peeks out again. The argument may not resolve in that minute, but it loses its appetite for destruction, and that is already a healing. There is a child inside every adult who strains to hear whether love is safe when disagreement arrives. Active silence tells that child the answer without fanfare. It speaks by posture, shoulders not squared for battle, hands unclenched, eyes willing to remain soft even when the words are hard. It speaks by timing, not rushing to fill the gap as if emptiness were danger, but letting the gap be a small sanctuary where God can place a thought neither party had considered. It speaks by restraint, not to suppress, but to curate, not to avoid, but to protect what is tender enough to require careful handling. The most luminous sentences in a household often emerge after silence has prepared a place for them to land without shattering. Examination question: what would God say to me if I listened before reacting? Some hear a question in return, kind as rain. What are you afraid of losing if you do not win? Some hear a naming. This is not about the dish in the sink. This is about the fear of being unseen. Some hear a memory being mended. You were not heard once before. You can be heard now without hurting. In such answers, the Father is not scolding. He is shepherding, leading the mind beside still waters so that it can drink enough calm to remember who the other person is. Joseph's way frames this listening not as passivity, but as hospitality. Hospitality to God's voice, to the other's heart, and to one's own limits, which are gifts the proud often mislabel as failures. The silence that heals is not indefinite. It has an interior hourglass. When the first sand has fallen, speech returns. But it returns altered, warmer, slower, more precise, less theatrical. The point remains, but the spearhead is removed. The truth stays, but its tone is baptized. The boundary stands, but it stands within the field of love, rather than beyond it. Those who have lived this way over time notice that even their bodies rearrange their habits. The throat no longer tightens as quickly, the stomach no longer knots for every disagreement. Sleep visits without asking for proof that everything is perfect. Perfection never was the point. Presence always was. Joseph's silence is an invitation to hear the heart of God. The heart of God is not loud, it is large. It stretches a room so that two imperfect people can fit inside without stepping on one another's wounds. It stretches the imagination so that solutions become more creative than compromise, dressed as surrender. It stretches time so that the urgency of fear loses its power to dictate every outcome. In that largeness, homes become more than shelters. They become workshops where love learns its craft with patient hands. And the master craftsman, who taught Joseph to listen in dreams and work in daylight, moves quietly among the tools, teaching each of us that some of the holiest victories will look from the outside like a pause, a nod, a breath, and the mercy to let the last word pass by unspoken. Sawdust glows like fine gold when the afternoon light passes through a workshop, and the fragrance of worked wood lingers on the skin long after the tools are put away. There is a holiness in that fragrance, a quiet witness that something ordinary has been touched by purpose and now carries a different weight. In homes across every city, the same holiness waits in the unnoticed places, at the washing machine that thumps its steady heartbeat, at the desk where emails multiply like fish that refuse to be counted, at the stove where onions surrender their sharpness and become sweet, at the steering wheel warm under a tired hand. Colossians 3:23 does not float above these places with abstract counsel. It kneels inside them and whispers to the muscles that ache, to the mind that organizes, to the heart that perseveres, that work can be more than pressure and more than proof. When work is received rather than braced against, when it is offered rather than endured, a transformation begins, not in the task first, but in the one who touches it. In Nazareth, nothing was wasted. Not the short pieces of wood that seemed too small to matter, not the practice cuts that trained the hand, not the mistakes that taught a steadier grip, not the late-day repairs that required starting again. A house learns from a workshop like a child learns from a parent. It watches what is done with failure, with fatigue, with a sudden joy that arrives unannounced when a difficult joint finally fits. The nervous system learns too. When the mind says, "This moment has meaning," the body adjusts its chemistry. Cortisol lowers a degree, breath finds a deeper lane, the shoulders remember their original height. Offering sanctifies physiology. Gratitude reorders neurotransmitters with a subtle mercy. Intercession gives endurance a face and a name, so that perseverance is no longer faceless strain, but love, spelled in effort over time. St. Joseph clock. Set 3 alarms, morning, afternoon, evening, to offer, thank, and intercede through your work. In many homes, 3 gentle chimes across a day change the atmosphere, the way a small chapel bell changes the street it overlooks. Not with volume, but with meaning. Morning carries the sound of beginnings, the first chime reminding the soul that intention is a compass and not a burden, that direction matters more than speed. Midday often sags under interruption and fatigue, and the second chime becomes a hinge, allowing the day to swing from pressure toward praise, from complaint toward a single sentence of gratitude for what is still possible. Evening brings the ache of limits and the soft confession that not everything was finished. The last chime does not accuse, it gathers, and intercession rises for those we love, for those who work beside us, for those whose work goes unseen and yet keeps the world tender and alive. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The phrase holds when the task is visible and applauded, and it holds when the task is hidden and unthanked. It holds when excellence sparks joy, and it holds when diligence is the only victory the day allowed. The body believes what it experiences, and when work is wrapped in offering, even a brief whispered kind, the body learns that effort belongs to something larger than survival. This is not escapism. It is integration. It is the welding of heaven and earth at the seam of the present moment, so that nothing honest is wasted, nothing faithful is lost, and nothing loving is small. There is a rhythm here that heals. Offer, thank, intercede. Offer, thank, intercede. Repetition does not dull. Repetition deepens. The soul, like a field, responds to the same rain falling in due season. The furrows take shape. The seed trusts the ground. The harvest becomes imaginable even when the sky is gray. In this rhythm, resentment finds less oxygen, because the heart is turned outward in offering. In this rhythm, entitlement loosens, because gratitude widens the lens and reveals provision that was hiding in plain sight. In this rhythm, isolation thins, because intercession pulls the beloved into the circle where work is being done, so that effort is no longer a private sentence, but a shared prayer. Some labor feels too humble to be offered and too endless to be thanked for. Another load of laundry, another spreadsheet that no one will remember, another errand through traffic that forgets to be kind. Yet humility is the very soil where sanctity grows best, and endlessness, when welcomed, becomes endurance without bitterness. Imagine a sink filled with dishes as a small Jordan river, where pride lets go of its grand plans and finds God in the basin. Imagine an inbox as a field where patience learns to walk upright. Imagine a commute as a rosary without beads, where the mind turns toward names that need mercy today. The heart is not pretending these tasks are glamorous. It is confessing that God is not bored with them, and that confession changes the taste of the day. There are rooms where work has become a rival to love, and in those rooms, reconciliation is possible. When work is conversion rather than competition, it stops stealing attention from relationships and begins feeding them. A parent returning from a shift can let the residue of effort become a blessing instead of a barrier, not by handing out advice, but by allowing presence to be as deliberate as any project was earlier. A spouse finishing a late task at the kitchen table can allow the glow of the screen to become a candle, by intention alone, a quiet offering of these minutes for the one sitting across, for the child sleeping down the hall, for the neighbor 2 doors over who has been on the heart all week. The task is the same, the center is different. The center makes the difference visible. The craftsman's square appears again, teaching alignment rather than acceleration. Without alignment, speed splits wood. With alignment, even pressure produces clean lines. The mind aligned to offering will still plan, still calendar, still pursue excellence, yet the fuel will be different. Panic burns hot and leaves ash. Purpose burns steady and leaves warmth. Excellence under fear demands applause. Excellence under offering desires communion. Under fear, fatigue becomes a verdict. Under offering, fatigue becomes an honest signal that bodies need rest and souls need a slower hour. In Nazareth's school, rest is not the enemy of work. Rest is part of work's holiness, the Sabbath hinge that keeps the door from tearing off its frame. Examination question: which task today can I offer for someone I love? The answer arrives with a face. A child who needs steadier attention, a partner whose load has been heavier than their words admit, a parent whose voice has grown thinner with the years, a colleague who masks fear with efficiency, a friend whose name keeps showing up in the mind uninvited. Attaching a face to a task personalizes perseverance. The task bends toward charity, and charity bends the task toward joy. Even the difficult piece, tedious, technical, repetitive, can carry sweetness when it is carried for someone. The heart is wired to endure for love what it would not endure for ego. Some will say that this is too small to matter in a world too loud to listen, yet the history of holiness argues otherwise. Small obediences build great houses, and great houses shelter those who are weary of noise. The Nazareth workshop did not attract crowds, yet the one who would save the world learned within its walls how wood responds to touch, how tools require patience, how timing is part of truth. In that same spirit, a person whose day is covered in spreadsheets or soil, diapers or deadlines, numbers or names, finds in their faithful tasks a school for the heart. Steadiness, attention, honesty, courage, precisely measured to the moment. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. There is a tenderness even in strong hands at the end of a long day. The skin remembers what it carried and what it let go. The joints remember where pressure was necessary and where it was not. The mind remembers which problems yielded to skill and which yielded only to time. In that tenderness, gratitude ripens. Gratitude does not deny what was hard. It names what was given. And naming what was given is itself a liturgy that strengthens tomorrow's will without chaining it to fear. When a home begins to speak this way, offer in the morning, thank at midday, intercede at night, it gradually acquires a sturdiness that guests can feel and children can rest inside. The calendar remains full, yet the soul remains spacious. Key phrase: with St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Let this sentence settle into the grain of the day like oil into wood, not as a glossy finish hiding flaws, but as nourishment that protects against splitting when the weather changes. The weather does change. Deadlines crowd, plans break, bodies falter, surprises arrive. Prayer under such weather is not a luxury. It is a way of standing without breaking. Work under such weather is not a curse. It is a way of loving without applause. Between the two stands a quiet guardian who knows how to keep a doorway safe, how to keep a bench sturdy, how to keep a heart listening. In his company and in the presence of the Master who sanctifies hours as surely as he sanctifies altars, even the smallest task finds its true size, large enough to carry love, small enough to keep us humble, holy enough to bless a home. In a quiet workshop, accuracy begins with listening to gravity. The plumb line does not argue with truth. It yields to it, hanging still until the world's hidden order draws it straight. Hearts learn a similar stillness when faith is allowed to hang freely inside the chest, without being pulled by panic or pride. And the body, which is honest before the mind is convinced, answers with signs a careful soul can notice. The breath sinks lower into the ribs, the shoulders soften, the jaw releases, and the mind that had been sprinting finally slows enough to consider love. Faith, like a plumb line, is not spectacle. It is reference, a vertical mercy that keeps illusions from tilting our rooms. When a household lets God's heart be the true north of its gravity, decisions find a steadier angle, and even old conversations stop sliding toward the edge where everything used to fall off. Charity enters like a square in the craftsman's hand, testing edges that the eye swears are fine, and revealing the slight drift that makes joints creak over time. Love works this way. patient, unsentimental, exact, aligning speech to tenderness, aligning correction to honor, aligning truth to humility, so that Romans 12:10 does not remain an embroidered verse, but becomes the way voices meet, outdoing one another in showing honor, not in scoring points. Ephesians 4:2-3 becomes audible in the timbre of a room. Lowliness, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another in love, so that unity is not demanded but maintained, like a good tool kept clean and true between uses. Charity as square does not flatten difference. It dignifies it, giving edges a way to meet without wounding, giving corners a way to carry weight without splitting. There are days when the grain of the wood surprises even a skilled hand, when knots resist and the blade catches, and progress sounds like friction. Forgiveness is the sandpaper for such days. It looks small beside the larger tools, and yet it saves more projects than any saw. Forgiveness does not erase the grain. It learns to move with it until roughness can welcome touch again, until yesterday's sharpness stops snagging today's hope. The nervous system knows this truth in its own language. When resentment is released, vigilance can stand down. The heart rate eases, the prefrontal cortex returns to the conversation with creative options that anger would never allow. Sanding is slow. Forgiveness often is too. Slow is not failure. Slow is fidelity to love's exact measurements. Perseverance holds as a nail holds. Quiet, firm, unglamorous, decisive. A structure does not need thousands of nails visible to brag about its strength. It needs the right nails, driven to the right depth with a steady hand. Perseverance chooses depth over noise, vows over moods, covenant over weather. There is a sacrament hidden in such constancy, the repeated choosing that teaches the soul it is safer to stay than to strike. Safer to repair than to run, safer to hope again than to announce the end. The body learns the feel of a well-set nail, the way the board stops shifting, the way the joint stops complaining. And a home learns the feel of kept promises, of small faithfulnesses hammered in day after day, until security is not a speech, but a floor that does not give way. Plumb, square, sandpaper, nail, faith, charity, forgiveness, perseverance. The order matters less than the presence of each, because a missing tool forces improvisations that seem clever for an hour and costly for a year. Without plumb, zeal tilts into control. Without square, truth bends into hardness. Without sandpaper, history scuffs every new attempt. Without nail, inspiration collapses at the first strong wind. In Joseph's company, the set stays together. His silence keeps faith free to hang straight. His fatherhood keeps charity measuring more than correcting. His humility keeps forgiveness near at hand, where pride would hide it. His steadiness keeps perseverance from rusting in a drawer labeled later. Some evenings disclose where angles have drifted. It is not dramatic, only a chair that wobbles, a tone that sharpens too quickly, a conversation that cannot bear weight. The soul recognizes the wobble because it is tired of balancing on uneven things, and tired bodies crave straight lines. Faith returns first, not as a lecture, but as a yielded breath that lets God be God again, and the plumb line settles. Charity follows, checking edges that habit had excused, and a sentence is rewritten with honor, so that the truth inside it can be received without splinters. Forgiveness rises with its humble patience, moving along the grain of a memory until the snag smooths, until touch feels safe where it tore before. Perseverance closes the evening with a quiet yes that does not perform, the kind that tomorrow will recognize when it wakes and finds the structure still standing. Oh, where is my household out of plumb? The answers often arrive with tenderness rather than accusation, because grace prefers a surgeon's hand to a hammer's head when souls are involved. Perhaps the tilt shows in the speed of your replies, in the way weariness makes you forget that the person across from you is the one you have chosen to keep. Perhaps the misalignment appears in the calendar that never leaves room for silence, or in the budget that cannot remember generosity, or in the bedtime that no longer ends with a gentle word. The question is not a verdict, it is an invitation to rehang the line and watch truth draw the room toward itself slowly and safely until balance feels like home again. At home, God is the master builder. We are apprentices of Nazareth. Apprenticeship relieves pressure while heightening dignity. It admits that perfection is the master's and progress is ours, that learning is worship when the lesson is love. In this apprenticeship, bodies are not enemies to the spiritual life, but instruments of its music. A slower breath as an assent to trust, a softened gaze as a courtesy to charity, a relaxed jaw as a small absolution given and received, a steady posture as perseverance taking its seat for the long kindness. What begins in the nervous system does not end there. It ripples into rituals that mark a family as belonging to a different gravity, the gravity of a heart that can hold every weight without warping. The workshop image is not nostalgia. It is prophecy about the texture of a redeemed ordinary. A table made in patience holds up holiday feasts, hurried breakfasts, difficult news, homework sprawled like maps to future roads. It holds elbows and foreheads, laptops and lilies, Bibles and bills, and it does not collapse. Homes built on this patient quartet, plum, square, sandpaper, nail, carry similar loads without cracking under them. When storms come, as they do, there is movement but not breakage. There is strain but not rupture. There is groaning but not despair. The creak that remains is not a threat. It is the music of something living that has learned how to yield and how to hold. Joseph stands near this music with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who knows when a line is true. He does not boast. He blesses. His presence does not remove the need for tools. It reminds the heart to reach for the right one. Faith keeps dropping straight through the middle of a day that tries to lean. Charity keeps bringing corners together without bruise. Forgiveness keeps softening the places that still catch. Perseverance keeps fastening the dreams that otherwise drift. Under such a roof, even the most ordinary Tuesday feels prepared to host grace, and even the most tired soul finds that gravity has become friendly again, the kind that draws everything toward the center where love is weighty and kind. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Evening gathers like a shawl around the shoulders of the house, and the day, with all its uneven edges, begins to soften the way wood warms under a craftsman's hand. In this gentler light, the heart can finally notice what it could not see at noon. That grace has been threading itself through ordinary minutes, that providence has been near, and that love, even when tired, has kept choosing to stay. What first felt like a scattered collection of hours now reveals a pattern. The hidden wound that once taught the home to brace is learning to breathe again. The blessing spoken over familiar faces has left a fragrance of safety in the air. The silence that once felt like surrender has become a doorway for wisdom. The work that once demanded proof has become a quiet offering, and the square, plum, sandpaper and nail have given the rooms a truer line to carry tomorrow's weight. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence, not as an argument against reality, but as its deepest context. The soul rests a little lower in the body when it remembers that the Father does not abandon his workshops or his children. There is a tenderness here that does not erase responsibility and does not flatter fear. It simply holds both with a steadiness that allows the nervous system to put down its shield and the imagination to welcome tomorrow without rehearsing disaster. Trust is not theatrical. It is embodied in small cadences, the slower reply that keeps dignity in the room, the lifted hand that traces a cross on a beloved brow, the honest sentence that tells the truth without tearing, the task offered with a name attached so that effort tastes like love rather than like survival. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The memory of blessing lingers like candlelight on the skin. Words simple enough for a child and strong enough for a storm have settled into the corners. And corners remember. They hold secrets of peace that return on difficult nights like a key that fits by feel. When a home has tasted this language, correction loses the edge of humiliation and keeps the edge of wisdom. Courage stops shouting and starts enduring, and affection, which had been hiding, takes its seat again at the table. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord give you peace. The syllables continue their slow work long after they are spoken. much like seeds that seem invisible until one day the garden answers with green. Silence returns as a friend who knows when to stand by the doorframe and when to cross the room. After so many hours in which words were asked to solve what they could only inflame, the pause has learned to carry meaning without menace. It is not avoidance to let the prefrontal cortex re-enter the conversation. It is reverence. It is not weakness to allow a minute of listening to gather the scattered pieces of a heart. It is strength with a human face. In such listening, the question rises without accusation and without rush. What would God say to me if I listened before reacting? The answers that follow are gentler than pride expects and firmer than despair imagines, and they make room for the kind of reconciliation that does not cancel truth, but baptizes its tone. The Nazareth rhythm has been beating quietly beneath the day. Offer, thank, intercede, and that rhythm has begun to tune the rooms. Under this cadence, perfection loses its tyrannical glare, and fidelity finds its way back to joy. Excellence becomes communion instead of performance. Rest becomes part of work's holiness instead of a guilty retreat, and tomorrow's plans are penned with a pencil that leaves space for the hand of God. A sink, a spreadsheet, a steering wheel, a stove. Each of these can carry prayer the way wood carries warmth after the sun has left the window. When intention becomes the hinge, even a tired evening opens without tearing the frame. And the tools, plumb, square, sandpaper, nail, wait where we left them, ready to keep teaching. Faith continues to fall straight through the center of our decisions, resisting the tilt of panic. Charity keeps measuring speech so that love is not tripped by its own urgency. Forgiveness sands the snags that yesterday left behind, patient enough to move with the grain of memory. Perseverance holds without noise, refusing to confuse drama with depth or resignation with covenant. At home, God is the master builder. We are apprentices of Nazareth. Apprenticeship grants the dignity of progress without the despair of perfectionism, and that humility keeps the atmosphere breathable for every age under the roof. If there is a single question to carry into the night, let it be one that opens rather than closes, one that invites rather than indicts, one that keeps the door on its hinges and the lamp on its table. What one habit begins tonight so that our home is more aligned to God's heart? The answer may be as small as a slower breath before a reply, as familiar as a hand resting lightly on a forehead, as ordinary as attaching a name to a task, as specific as rechecking an angle before words are spoken. Small does not mean shallow. Small means scalable, repeatable, human enough to endure. Now, in the kind of quiet that does not erase the day but gathers it, a prayer rises with the grain of everything we have remembered. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Watch over the thresholds where we enter and leave, that fear may not greet us first. Stand by the bedsides where sleep learns to trust again. Be near the tables where bread and tension sometimes share the same hour. That blessing may find language and sit down with us. Teach our breath to keep pace with faith, our words to keep pace with charity, our memories to accept the gentle sanding of forgiveness, our courage to keep the long kindness of perseverance. In the school you keep with Mary under the gaze of Jesus, let our home become a workshop where love learns accuracy and patience, where truth and tenderness are not rivals, where work and prayer are neighbors that share tools and light. In this blessing, nothing dramatic needs to happen, and yet everything real begins to happen. The room feels held. The bodies feel welcome. The future loosens its fist. The past stops narrating the only story it knows. The present, finally believed, becomes spacious enough for God to walk through without bumping his shoulders on our hurry. And the refrain we have learned to love finds its way forward, not as a punctuation mark, but as a path. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. At home, God is the master builder. We are apprentices of Nazareth. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us.